Okay, hello everyone. I'm glad everyone's here. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jimson Lee from speedendurance.com, and welcome to our first edition, first of two sessions for the Paralympic Coaches Club. I'm really excited about this. It's quite a diverse panel, some great content. We've had a great 11 days of the Olympic Tokyo sessions, and we had 2 days of the World Juniors just a few days ago. All these recordings and videos are on my YouTube channel. I'll post that in the link. Until then, the first person I want to introduce is Frank Dick. I think everyone knows Frank. Frank's a former GB coach, personal coach to Olympic, world, and European medalists. And now he's the chair of Global Athletics Coaching Academy and our EACA president. Welcome, Frank.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Jimson, and thank you for being there, because I know everybody's going to be thrilled with the quality of conducting you give to this great orchestra in front of you. Well, some of you will be wondering, well, what on earth is a Global Athletics Coaching Academy? Well, let me explain this. Seb had a vision. Seb Coe had a vision for World Athletics. And if I can just read the particular bits to you of the vision in starting the Academy itself, he said, as you may be aware, I had a distinct vision and interest that a body be formed from amongst the coaching community dedicated to athletics coaching related matters and to facilitate bringing necessary change. So a body for coaches, by coaches, addressing all athletics coaching related matters and to facilitate bringing about necessary change. So I'm fortunate the chair of that. Charles Van Comedy is the vice chair, and we've got a group of strategic board members from California through to Queensland, Australia. This is the body that Seb wanted to create. One early initiative that we decided on as a board was to create what we call the World Athletics Coaches Club. And when we had the first discussion, it was before the days that we now take as completely normal of having virtual communication. The idea was that whenever we went to a major championships, there should be a place, a venue to go to for those coaches who are not normally accredited. They don't get into the village, they don't see other coaches. Why don't we create a meeting place for them to network, to maybe get bits of CPD? Sean Pickering helped me on this when we did one for European Championships in Europe, contributing to CPD, and also maybe adding in a few interviews. So that's the stuff on the ground, and World Athletics has agreed that as of 2025, any country who wishes to host a World Championships, junior, indoors, outdoors, any country who's going to do that must offer a venue free of charge for the coaches to have their coaches club. So that was a big step forward. However, in the meantime, COVID, for all the tragedy that it brought to the world, actually opened our eyes to different ways of thinking and communicating. And otherwise, we wouldn't be having what we're having here right now. And so why not have a virtual coaches club to work as a hybrid with the stuff on the ground, or separately, just to move in and out as we had with the Olympic Games and the World Juniors. The various areas of the world ran their own coaches clubs. So that's why we're here, and that's how we've moved forward. We had one for the Olympic Games. We had one for the juniors. So why not dip into other waters altogether? Why not look at the Paralympic Games? And so we looked at that. Thanks very much to Tabo, to Peter, to Jimson for standing his ground and hosting for us, to Giacomo Galetto from Europe for the technology, and to Stefan Merlino from World Athletics. They made all of this stuff possible. After that, all we needed to do was find quality panelists, and you've certainly got that today, folks. Let the world know, and we've got, I think it's something like 150 people have registered altogether for this event, and we're ready to go. But one thing you might be thinking about is that, well, how on earth are you, Frank, getting involved with Paralympics? Because it's nothing to do with you. You're supposed to be across there. Well, I'll tell you something, folks. Back in time, there's a chap called Colin Moynihan, Lord Moynihan. He, as sports minister for the UK, he produced a paper called Building on Ability. And I love the concept of that, because that's what we are supposed to do as coaches. We are supposed to see whoever is in front of us, whatever their level of ability, and adapt our skills to meet their needs. So I don't like the notion of disability coming into the equation. I like the fact that everybody, whether they're working in the Paralympics, whether they're working in the Olympics or whatever, we are all coaches. That's what brings us together. And that's the underlying theme for why we are to get here together. Let me pass on to Tabo.
Hi, good evening, guys, and welcome to this first ParaCoach Athletics Club. It's been an amazing privilege to work with Peter, Frank, Jimson, and the European Athletics Coaches Association to put this event on. And I'm pretty excited by this because it's one of the first coaching events to look at this particular area as a real focus. And for those who don't know me, so my name's Tabo Huntley. I'm an academic at John Moores University in the UK. I also am the director of a ParaCoach European funded project. And the aim of that project is to get more coaches coaching athletes or para-athletes and athletes with disability, just as Frank alluded to there. There shouldn't be any barriers to coaches providing their services and care for any form of athlete, but yet there are still barriers to do that. And for us, what excited me most about this is the prospect of kind of increasing awareness of the opportunities within para-athletics and para-sport, and to hopefully inspire you guys and us all really to learn more, to become more effective at increasing those types of opportunities for what is an amazing group of athletes globally. So I'm pleased that you've signed up. I hope we'll have some engaging discussions. We've got a great panel set of panelists, and we also got a follow-up event to this on the 6th of September, where we'll probably have more panelists and more people on board. But kind of enough from me. If you want to kind of follow this stuff that we're doing at John Moores, it's follow us on www.paracoach.eu. We're on Twitter as well, but we're hoping that this will be the first of many of these types of workshops and learning opportunities. So my thanks does go to Frank for picking up the phone, and to Peter and Jimson and the rest of the team, and also the panelists who are here today. Thanks for giving up your time. We've got a few that are directly out of Tokyo, so it's kind of like 2:10 in the morning. So again, thank you to the likes of Suzanne. We've got Steffi. I believe we've got Trevor on board as well now. So we've got a great set of panelists. So I'll leave that over to you, Jimson. But thank you, everyone.
No, great. Thanks, Tabo. So we got a lot of great panelists. Instead of introducing them one by one right now, I'll do it as we ask them questions, keep the flow going. So just a reminder, this is not a webinar. This is interactive. You're free to ask questions by raising your hand on the Zoom. You can raise your hand on the screen. I'll see you. And you can also add it to the chat window as well for everyone to read. So please, we really welcome some engagement from people. So let's start off with our first panelist. I'll start off with Dr. Suzanne Ferreira. She's one of South Africa's most successful sprint coaches of Paralympic athletes. She has coached multi-Paralympic medalists, Ilse Hayes, T13, visually impaired, and Fanie van der Meer, T37, cerebral palsy, and now coaching a young crop of international stars. Welcome, Suzanne, and welcome from Tokyo. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I think the first question I want to ask, everyone in the last 18 months have been affected by COVID, no doubt about that. So my first question is, what challenges did COVID-19 present to your coaching practice? What did you learn? What interventions did you put in place? Virtual, Zoom calls? How do you do that? So yeah, comments on that, please.
So, Jimson, that's a kind of a loaded question because it's extended and there's different type of challenges that came about. But I think the first thing that I realized is that I was really grateful to have been within parasport because it made me learn how to be really creative and adaptive in the way that we think, in the way that we train. So I was very grateful for that background. I think the first part that was really hard and tough for me was the unknown. When is the games going to go on? Is it not going to go on? And in South Africa, we went into a real hard lockdown, which means we couldn't move out of our houses. So that was then to try and see what can people do in what they have in their space. And that came quite quick on us. There was not a lot of time to think and prepare and go and buy some equipment to take into a house. It was like the one moment we're training outside on the track, the next moment it was like in a day, then you're stuck in your house. And I think I needed to go back to what my coaching philosophy is and really hold on to that quite tight. I really believe in connection, and a big part of that time we were for 6 weeks in a hard lockdown that they couldn't get out of houses. And the main thing there for me was to really connect with the athletes and make sure from a motivational point of view that they are well from a health perspective. Because, like I said, they didn't know at that stage if the games is going on or not, and that put a lot of stress on them. And then to make use of whatever they have in their houses and to try and just keep their bodies going and keep them in a shape that's possible, that when we can start training again. And I think the other thing that is still with me is we started a saying, embrace the space. We only have this today, and we have what we have today, and we do what best we can do with today. And it took a little bit of long-term planning away. So you plan for today based on what we have done, and then you put the next stone in place. And when we know more, we could move forward. So I think that was sort of the principles I stood on as connection, and then just moment by moment to go forward. I think that was what we did.
No, good answer. The big thing about the Olympics for both able-bodied and Paralympic is the extra year. You've seen senior athletes at the end of their career, not make it to the games. You had people who had no chance in hell last year medal this year. So how did it affect the training? How did that extra year affect your group of people?
Yeah, so I had one guy that was planning on retiring, and he needed to consider, he's got a family, he's got, from financial point of view, it actually had a real impact on not just the one athlete that wanted to retire, from a lot of them. Economics had a big impact. The planning, the moment we could start training, they needed to make a decision, are they going forward in the moment we knew it's going on. But even then, it was not sure. So the planning, the periodization plan, I revert back, and I know you are taught you need to have a place where you want to go to, where you work from. I sort of, in a way, I don't want to say drop completely where we want to go to, but it was so uncertain that I focus on not having any injuries, because the layoff was quite significant, and to build back on. So I think the extra year gave us some more time that I could go back to quite an extensive general preparation phase to build up the strength, because a lot of them lost a lot of strength, and to work from there onwards. But it gave us some space to then build up to a level where we can be at the games. Our challenge in South Africa was competition times, and times to qualify and to create slots for our country. And that also played a part in making decisions on going forward. But the extra year was well received after it was announced.
Well, one of the hardest adjustments I've noticed in life and to my regular athletes was using Zoom all the time. We became Zoom masters, but for a visually impaired athlete, how do you do a Zoom call? How do you do that? What can you work around for that?
Yeah, so I think when you coach visually impaired athletes, you learn how to communicate very clearly, and with okay. I don't know, you leave out the words that you don't really need to use, and you just go very specific, and make sure that they understand. So the communication is really important. It's not so much the visual feedback. Okay. It's more the communication and the words that you choose to explain to them. Okay. So yeah, they could still hear, and they could still hear the feedback that you gave, and communicating with that. And I could still see if they do movements in the house, they could record and give me some feedback, and we could work from that. But it's just the way that you communicate, and I didn't find it different from the track, actually.
Wow. Okay, great. I want to ask Peter Eriksson, another one of our panelists. Peter was one of our panelists at our other event. He was a head coach of Olympic and Paralympic programs in both the UK and in Canada, and now he's a high-performance sport consultant in Canada. Welcome, Peter. So,
thank you.
Any comments to what Suzanne said about the challenges of COVID training, COVID learning, communication? Anything comments on that?
Yeah, it has been a massive challenge for a lot of sports, and I oversee a lot of sports in Canada through my job. So the biggest thing for us here in Canada is basically being locked up. And in track, there's been no movements, even going to the US and compete if you don't live there on a full-time basis. So the competition have been sparse at best. However, the advantage is what Susan also referred to: you have more time to prepare and heal from injuries that we might have been dragging along for a period of time. But the competition has been hindering the sport in general and athletics in particular here. So it's been a very tough time.
Okay. So while I have you on the mic, one of the big topics about the last Tokyo Olympics was the heat, the humidity, and the time zone differences. And because of COVID, the USA didn't have a holding camp before. They flew in 5 days from the USA. So what kind of challenges do you think, again, maybe repeating from the last call, because not everyone was here, did you find with the preparation with all these three factors: heat, humidity, and time zone?
The time zone on the camps for the Canadian sports and athletics, I know them well, there has not been any problems with that. So they have been in camps for 2 weeks leading up to the games. And it's depending on how you have planned it too. But the ones that haven't gone to Japan for a staging camp, they stage in Vancouver, which is from where I live, a 3 hours time difference. And then they start to change the time while at the camp. So the time difference going over is very little. And I think that the heat is something that is specific to para sport, is for quadriplegics, which don't sweat, a big problem. And humidity is going to be a problem for a lot of classes in para sport. But it's nothing new, because we had that for Canadians, anything that is plus 10 degrees is hot. So we had that before. In Rio was the same thing. Barcelona was the same thing. Sydney was the same thing. So it's really nothing new. And we've been preparing quite a bit with monitoring of body temperature and heat training in specific locations, right? They have a big tent for rowing, for example, which also the wheelchair athletes can use for rollers, where they put up the heat and humidity to the same level. So they've been in training doing that for a number of years. So they should be prepared for that. However, as I said, some of the para classes, their body is not adjusting well to it as is.
Okay, great. I want to call on another panelist here, because he coaches someone famous in England, and that is Trevor Painter. So for those who don't know Trevor, he has a unique privilege of coaching his wife, which I swear, I don't know how you do that, but my hat's off to you for coaching your wife. And so, as you know, Jenny Meadows is very famous here in the UK. And so Trevor is currently the British Athletics Pathway team leader, and also coaches at his local club in Wigan, which is about half an hour north of Manchester. I know, I've been there before. So, and Trevor has some experience coaching athletes with disabilities. So Trevor, so just sort of harp on Peter's answer. What are your thoughts about the heat and humidity, especially in Tokyo?
I didn't find it too bad. So I was at the holding camp with Keely Hodgkinson before she went into the village, and everything was it wasn't as bad as I've experienced in other areas at other championships. I remember Osaka being pretty brutal in 2007 when I was there with Jen. But I guess the more times you experience heat exposure or climate like that, the easier that your adaptation to it is. So for me, it wasn't too bad. Keely herself didn't report too badly because she pulled away with the silver medal. So I think she coped with it quite well as well.
Yeah, great. We got a question from the group here. Hanan Khaled, hope I pronounced it right. You have a question? I see you have your hand up, Hanan. Hanan, your hand is up. Or just saying hello. Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. I'll just lower your hand. Okay, so let's get back to the another topic that's really been, you know, the hot topic about classification here. So there's a question here about Tokyo. Like some athletes did not know if they would be classified in time for Tokyo. Maybe Peter, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, the classification is controlled by IPC, so they usually set that up with major international events. And since they're lacking international events this year and being canceling events, so what they have done, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, and it opens also the door for inconsistency in classification, is that they allow international classifiers in their home country to do international classification. That's never been allowed before, but this was just to bridge the gap. But as I said before, that could be a problem, but it remains to be seen when the game starts, so to speak. But IPC have been asked to do classification at the games, and they said they wouldn't do it. But now I see classifiers posting that they are going to do classification at the game. So I don't know if they're going to double check the ones that was done, or they're going to do new classification. I doubt that they will do new classification, but Susan might know more than I do about that.
Okay. Well, I want to focus on athletes because we're coaches. I want to focus on athletes who became coaches. So the next panelist I wanted to introduce is Steffi Nereus, is a retired German Olympic silver medalist and world and European champion in the javelin. She now coaches at TVS Bayer 04 and is a personal coach to the Paralympic T64 long jumper and world record holder Marcus Rem. I think those who follow the sport knows who Marcus Rem. Everyone knows Marcus is called a blade jumper because he recently jumped 862. Steffi, welcome and thank you for joining tonight.
Thank you. Hello together.
Great, thank you. So I guess my question is, has coaching in the Olympics prepared you for coaching, like for Paralympics? Like how was it to go from the athlete to the coaching level? That's probably the best, because not all great athletes become good coaches, and vice versa. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Therefore, I'm not the coach for javelin thrower. I'm the coach for long jumper. Now I have to study a sports study, and I learn all the trainings methodically and the annual structure, and I know it from myself. How was the annual structure, and therefore it's not so big difference between the Olympic and the Paralympic athletes, and therefore it's not so difficult. It was not so difficult for me, and I started with the work with Marcus. We met us 2008, the first time I stopped my own career 2009 after the world champion, and therefore I have had enough time for him. And he started, he jumped before he left the legs, and or lose the legs better. I'm sorry, I'm not too good in English.
That's fine. Don't worry.
Therefore, we start. He jumped the first time from the prosthetics, and the first jump was 5.40 meters, and it was we grow together. It's for me it's like a coach for pupil for little kids, not youth athletes, and we it's not right grow up, but I mean grow up together in the international. And yeah, it was the interesting thing is you need the feeling for this protease. And he's I think he's the only one that has a very special feeling. What must you do with this prothetic to jump far? And we made a lot of trainings content with different types of jumps, and I think therefore he gets this feeling for this.
So here's a kind of a controversial question. So as you get athletes who are really good in the sport, setting a world record that's very equal to the able-bodied world record, how do they feel about competing like integrated or, you know, to compete in the Olympics? I mean, that's a very controversial question.
It was the first time, 2014, I asked the German Federation if he can jump in the Olympic championship, in the German championship. And they say to me, it was a big point at Germany, okay, inclusion, very good. And yeah, he can jump and he's normal in the results, and not in the own ranking. It's in a normal ranking. And that's what's my big object, that he can push him the last 100%. When he jumped 1 meter or 80 centimeter farther like the second one, then it's not the same when the other jumper jump 8:30, and he must push himself to get 120% from myself, and therefore was this year a big object to jump during the Olympic Games in this own ranking. Yeah, and that was a little bit difficult after the cancellation of the cast, that Marcus could not jump there, and it was a little bit hard to motivate him. He wanted to get the medal in the Paralympic Games, but yeah, he must be motivated for this. And yeah, we started again, and now he's a very good performance, and I'm look forward for this competition on Wednesday.
Okay, great, thank you. So I will get to the research question in a few minutes. I know people like about research, and I will talk about training programs and courses and getting certifications and where to learn. But I wanted to keep on focusing on the coaches part. So I guess, Suzanne, you're lucky because you're in Tokyo, but a lot of personal coaches didn't get a chance to go to Tokyo this year. This is both the other Olympics and this coming Olympics, which really starts tomorrow, actually. What can you do, or like Suzanne, how can you communicate with your athletes if you're a personal coach but you're not in Tokyo? You can't bring your cell phone, your mobile phone with you, right? Any thoughts on that? Because you must be surrounded by people who are coached by their personal coach who are not at the games, right, Suzanne?
Yeah, so I'm lucky. So quite a few of the athletes that I do coach is that I'm a personal coach with. So that is a big plus and a big gift for me to be able to share this time with them and really have a space to pick up who they are. Because at this moment, I don't know, I might be wrong, but my take is the training are done. So it's really about the psychological aspect and applying it and adapt to the circumstances. The athletes that's here, they are communicating with their own coaches, and I basically just facilitate a good environment for them to implement and make sure that all the administrative things are in place and be there for them from a psychological support aspect. But the detailed training programs and those sort of things are given by the coaches themselves. Then there's one coach that we are lucky, that is the long jumper that actually jumps with Marcus Rem. He's individual, his private coach is also here, and we incorporate him. He sees the athlete at the track and train with him in that capacity. So I think, yes, we are lucky that technology has improved to a point where there's Wi-Fi at the track and you can actually send videos if they want to have technical aspects. But I think the youngsters, that is harder. But for the more senior athletes, they are equipped. I think the coaches does a real good job for them to come here and apply their skill from that capacity. So the other thing I try to do is to really also be in contact with some of the coaches and make them aware if there's needs of things that I become aware of. But yeah, that is how we manage it.
Yeah, get two hands up here. Frank first, and then Peter after. Frank, you're up.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Just a quick question to Suzanne and the other coaches who are involved out there. Just how big is we've talked about technology here, but when it comes to wheelchairs and so on, I guess there's a lot of technical aspects as well, keeping things maintained and so on. Just how big and just how specialized is the technical team?
Okay, Peter, you had your hand up as well?
Yeah, it was a question for Susan since you're there. How is classification working, or is it in place, or what do they do?
Okay, so first, Peter, your question on classification. Some sports, they have allowed some classification to take place if the athlete has already a reviewed sports class. So if it's confirmed, then but there were some athletes that have a review date of 2021 or 20 and 2021, and they are allowed in some sports to have some classification. So like for South Africa, and then they also needed to prove, the countries, they didn't have an opportunity to travel to some of the classification opportunities. So like for us in South Africa, we were sort of banned from any overseas competitions because we're South African and had a COVID variant that didn't allow us to travel to any competitions. So we had 4 athletes that went for classification yesterday, but they were all already international athletes that were on the review status for the 2020 or 2021 phase. So that was the classification is currently taking.
Okay, any other questions on that? Trevor, maybe you want to harp in a bit about being a personal coach and not being at the big event. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's something you strive for all your career, isn't it? To get in that Olympic stadium. And I was lucky enough to go to the holding camp, but then once Keely went into the village, I was shown the door and sent home. So luckily, you try and make your athletes autonomous so that they can get along without you, because the current way athletics is there's a lot of traveling involved and you can't always be there. So, they have to get used to dealing without you in that situation. British Athletics had a strong team staff there, so that, they would make sure she was doing the right things at the right times. And we spent a lot of time on FaceTime and things like that. We would keep her mentally in the right place and just have those conversations that we would normally have anyway. So for us, it wasn't really different. She was the same at the European Championships. We weren't allowed to travel there, and most of the races throughout Europe this year have been similar. So it's a case of it's a new world we have to get used to and deal with the barriers in place. And thankfully we got through it.
That's great. I want to call on Sean Pickering, who's on this call. So those who don't know, Sean throws performance lead for UK Athletics and team coach for Tokyo 2020 and London 2012. He's also a member of Great Britain's Olympic team in '96 in Atlanta. And Sean, he also was a panelist at our last event. Sean, you have comments on what Trevor or Suzanne said earlier?
It was really to follow up on what Trevor was saying. I was there as one of the team coaches. I wasn't a personal coach to any of the 5 throwers. I was a team coach there. Trevor was a personal coach. We were only allowed, I think we have 5 P accreditations, 5 accreditations for personal coaches, and Team GB, the British Olympic Association, wouldn't allow any other personal coaches to travel even to the holding camp. And that's disappointing, obviously, for the athletes not to have their coach there in the holding camp, particularly in the stadium. stadium, it's another matter. It's always been difficult there. But in the holding camp, it would have been very valuable. So my role was very much to facilitate that communication at the training, getting the technology there to watch for the team, the Zoom calls or whatever from back home, but also to give feedback into those personal coaches at home as to what we were seeing on the ground, whether the athlete was starting to get a little tired, whether maybe they were doing a bit too much, and trying to get the coaches to adjust the training program to back off a little bit, because they hadn't seen, they maybe hadn't gone to a major championships before. They didn't know what was going to happen with the time change and the acclimatization and what was happening with the weather. So it was very important to be able to feed back good information to the coaches, so that then the coaches could still take responsibility for the programming of their athletes. And then when it got to the stadium and when it got to the event themselves, again, you were trying to feed back. I'd been listening to the feedback from the coaches during the training sessions to make sure we were speaking the same language, to make sure we were addressing the right problem or the right issue, the one thing to focus on perhaps. And then when it came to the actual event in the stadium, to give that feedback, perhaps to make sure that we were sending film back to the coaches, but getting their feedback to be able to send that into the athlete in the arena. So it was a very different role, you know, as the team coaches had to take on a lot more than just administration in this case. So it was a different situation. The same thing will happen at the Paralympics.
Okay, great. I think there's a common theme here, and that's like training, certification. Where do you get support for learning? You know, where do you find places to mentor off people, right? Because of all these challenges. So maybe I can ask Steffi, if you want to come back on the call here, unmute yourself. Where can someone go to learn more about the coach's education curriculum in general, like to learn more about jumps, for example? Jumps. Steffi, you want to answer that one, or if you can?
Yeah, I don't understand at all.
Sorry. So I want to learn more about jumps.
Yeah.
Where can I go to learn more about, like online or courses? Is there webinars?
How you can learn? I think you can learn when you try. What I said, we make a lot of different types of jumps to learn jumping. You can learn jumping when you jump, and when you get this feeling for jumping. And for example, in the long jump, it's not identical to the Olympic sport. In Marcus jumps, there you have to note that you can't necessarily lower the body center of gravity with a prosthesis before jumping. You don't go this like a normal jumper, but you must try it. It's difficult to explain this. You must try it, and it's a good get together with the athletes. You must talk with him. What is the feeling? What is the feeling from the prosthesis? And yeah, I think my main training thing is to jump a lot of different kind of jumps. Not only long jump, we go with steps, with I don't know what else. So long terms that you can jump, and then you got this feeling for jumping.
Right, it's a very big open question. We got two hands up here. Frank, your comments on learning, coaching, curriculums.
Yeah, it's really come back to the previous question, because I'm not quite sure if I caught the answer to it. I was asking about the specifics and the numbers of persons involved in the technical support. But I can link that. I'd like to link that now with what we're discussing. Just how much in coaches' education now must the coach understand about the technology that is out there, whether it's communications technology or whether it's on the ground kind of technology? How much must they understand about that? Because it seems to me their judgments and decision making in terms of techniques will be very dependent on that.
Okay. Peter, your hand up?
Maybe I can jump in with an answer on that, Frank, because I think it's a good question. And it's also a problem because we have biomechanists that is helping us in the sport and who is very scientific. And I think that what you need is people that can translate the science into coaching language. That's the key thing with getting the most specific out of technique training. And then the other thing, when it comes to learning and coaching, I think it's also up to the person, the coach, to look for learning opportunities, not just go through the regular coaching education seminar, but also finding mentors that you can pick their brains and learn from. I mean, we missed a lot of opportunities that in Seb Coe's father, for example, or many other good coaches that is no longer with us. And we forget to ask them questions. So that's why I enjoy working with guys like the panel here and Frank and Sean and these guys. You can ask questions. You always learn something. Because the moment we believe as coaches we know everything, then it's time to pack it up, I think.
Okay. Sean, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was brought into Team GB in the lead up to London 2012 by Charles Van Commonie on the Olympic side. Peter was the Paralympic head coach at the same time, and he said to Charles, I also want Sean involved in the Paralympic approach. I want to try and bring some more knowledge across. And that was an incredible learning experience for me to spend time around Peter that had so much experience in lots of different events, but to watch also the Paralympic athletes and what they had to work on and what they had to overcome, but also to put myself in the same place. I was brought in to work with some of the seated throwers and some of the less ambulant throwers, and to try and figure out their approach or their limitations, to find ways to get around them and to improve upon what their skills were, their particular skill set. And then that came into another very difficult, complicated area, which is the rules and regulations you have to work with, which is things on the seated throws about lifting rules and the construction of the frame and how that's fitted into the ground and attached. And it really was a very complicated process to try and figure out, like, for example, I worked with a seated thrower who was 165 kilos, and you have a holding bar that you pull onto, and the rules say that cannot flex to the naked eye, that you shouldn't be able to flex. I'm like, look, we had an 1.25 inch steel thick pipe, and he was 165 kilos. He was going to lean on it. The chair would deflect. The straps would stretch. The bar would bend. And all of that was noticeable because he was 165 kilos pulling on it, as a very strong man. So the limitations of the rules also created problems. We had to try and ask for more serious equipment, that we asked for modifications to the equipment to try and stop it bending so much, that actually went against the rules, because it actually was given more limitations. Where there were rules against having flexible bars. Well, we needed something to make it stronger, because at 165 kilos, he was bending 1.25 inch steel, bar. So that the advantage or the advice I would give to coaches is you have to also go and experience it. You have to sit on a chair, try and figure out what it is to sit on a chair using one leg or only two legs, and what you can and cannot do, to then try and figure out what you can use to overcome the particular limitations of an athlete. Because some would have had a good abs up until a certain level, and some would have been impacted lower down. Then you had to approach the technique in a very different way. And only by experiencing that, for me, it was a great learning experience that then I could then take across also into my able-bodied athletes as well.
Okay, great input. Tabo, you have your hand up? Comments on that?
Yeah, I think this is really great. I think what the insights that are being shared so far supports what we're doing in terms of research. And the research I've done with looking at learning and development within Paralympic sport will suggest that in the absence of effective coach education, and I'm not really having a go at coach education as such, because how do you create a curriculum for so many different events with different people with different disabilities and you know, like Sean just says, and Steffi and would say, you know, there needs to be a kind of an experimentation, and that's okay. It's okay to learn with your athlete, to learn from with your athlete, and to learn through practice. But at some stage, we need to translate the knowledge that's going on in practice and in the ground through this experimentation into some form of dissemination, so that all coaches don't have to start with, you know, right, you know, what's a throwing frame, you know, what does that look like, or what does a chair look like, or what does propulsion look like for racing. We need to somehow get to the point where we can create a benchmark or a level playing field in terms of dissemination of knowledge and education, so that then we can then you know, move that ceiling beyond and create new forms of knowledge and new ways of doing things. So, and that comes back to the technology. Technology is evolving so quickly. You know, what you see well in terms of science and technology is that, you know, there will be research papers, there will be blogs, there will be something that you can go to try and find that information, but it's very difficult to go and find resources specific to particular events and ways, you know, athletes may ambulate, etc. So this environment that we're in is a really great start, and particularly that we can record it as well.
No, great. Okay, Frank, comments on that?
Yeah. Not on that particular point, but I really appreciate Tabo's contribution there, because I'd like to think that coaches can work with the researchers and the academics to make sure that we get the outcomes that we need. Now, it's to come back to this idea of competition, because I actually came across this when I had the good fortune to work with Suzanne some years ago, when I had a couple of years in South Africa before the 2012 games. And it's this business of how to find competitive opportunity. Once you get athletes who in the para group who have got to a particular level, there's almost no point of them competing against their peers. They need to actually be allowed to compete in other competitions. For example, in just to say a normal club competitions or inter-club competitions. Is it possible? And I know how difficult it was at that point to get that done, but is it possible to get Paralympians involved in the, shall we call them the able-bodied for purposes of this discussion? Can we get them involved in their competitions? What would be the problems of doing that? And do we have solutions for these people who find the problems? Okay,
Peter, you want to answer that? You have a hand up?
Well, I can try to answer it. I think we come a long way, though, Frank. And one of the things we started in the UK was that the same. So the same competition, the same coaching, the same support services. And we actually started to move into events. I don't know, it seemed to have been sliding right now, but we were in events that actually was Diamond League events. We have specific events integrated. That's one thing, but depending on your disability, you can, as a visually impaired, you can run in an able-bodied race, and there's several examples. So that actually back to even 1992 was the US 800 meter, 1500 meter runner that used to do that. I can't remember her name. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with
you. So I think that we need to work more on that. And then the question is, how do we deal with long jumpers that Steffi is coaching, for example, being integrated into bigger major events? Is that possible, right? And I think Steffi can answer that more than anything else. I also have a question for Steffi after that.
That's really my question. Can we promote that? Is there any way of taking the idea a step further? Sorry, Steffi.
Everything okay? It was I don't know. It was 5 years ago. There was a European Championship in Amsterdam, and there was included the long jump 63 in this European Championship, and that was a great event for disabled people. And I think that's the first step to use Golden League or Diamond League or whatever to include it some disabled competition. I don't know. You can do everything. I think in Zurich they did it sometimes. They have a wheelchair run between the normal competition, and I think we had a chance. And in Germany, it's for the young people, it's no problem to start in the Olympic competitions and be together with the Olympic athletes. But when you jump farther or run faster, then it would be a problem for everybody.
Okay, so just adding to and this is not. I know Sean will smile immediately because he thinks I'm being perverse, but I'm not being perverse on this question. I'm wondering when we are going to have mixed relays with able-bodied and the Paralympians.
Yeah, it's a can of worms there, Frank.
Well, that could be a hard one for people to understand to start with. I think it was a little bit resistant to mixed relays period, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's possible, but it would be hard for people to understand if they don't run the same leg. So if every second leg is a para-athlete, then it would be hard for them to see who is running what. Because if you throw in a blind, visually impaired sprinter, you have this Irish guy that ran in the Europeans 10.23, whatever he had. And if you see him run a leg for a Paralympic leg, then people will know that he's actually visually impaired. So you have to be very specific in saying this leg is for para, this is for Olympic athletes, which works for me. But I think that when it comes back to the competition and integration, what we managed to do in the UK at the time was that we pushed the para event into the middle of the time schedule. So not before the event. Now I see again that that's falling backwards. And now in the UK, they start out with Paralympic events, and then the major event starts with the Diamond League. So nobody really sees that paras are at the events.
Okay. Well, but if we go back a square to the initial question on this, what I had in mind was, for example, the sprinter who's running 10.3 partially sided. At some point, he's not going to be wanting to run against partially sighted people because he needs other people to make him move faster, right, and to deeper competition. And what I'm asking is it possible to, it may not have to be something as glamorous as Diamond League or whatever, but is it not possible if you're trying to prepare athletes to go through new frontiers of performance, to have them working in competitions against the able-bodied athletes to help them to go across that frontier? That's really all I'm asking for. And Sean, in the throws and the jumps, and I get that, but I'm really at the moment just thinking about track events.
I think it is possible.
Hang on, guys. We got two hands up here. Kevin first, and then Sean after. Kevin.
European Championships 2000. No, I forgot 20. It was in last editions. We ran Jason Smith. I don't know if you guys know Jason Smith. Partially sighted, multi gold medalist. We ran him at the European Championships on our first leg of our 4x1 men's relay at the European Championships. I don't know of any other person that's ever, rather a team that's ever run a partially, well, he can't see and he ran the curve anyhow, but I mean, we ran 39:02, made the final. So, and that's with, again, we put him in there. He was the fastest runner, and we said, why not stick him in there and use him? I think where we run into trouble is, again, if it's bladed versus partially sighted, how they're classified. But that's a challenge. But I thought it was a great opportunity, not only for Jason, who really relished that opportunity, but also the team embraced it anyhow, because he was a better runner than anyone else that we had at that time to put him on the first leg.
Yep, good thinking.
Okay, Sean had his hand up. Sean?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, in the UK, we try to integrate as much as possible in some of the bigger competitions, but that's easier among some categories than others, because we will have ambulant throwers. Dan Greaves, for example, has competed in Diamond League and competed in other major competitions. He's thrown 60 meters with a 1.5 discus, but his category allows him to do that as an ambulant thrower. You can't do that with a seated thrower quite so easily because of the time it takes. And I think that's part of the problem also with the classifications. There is a mixed classification relay now in the Paralympics that has a number of points, and you have 4 athletes with different capabilities running in that relay. And that's to try and mix it up a little bit, I think, which is a good thing, because the classification sometimes to try and bring them together. Ali Davis has thrown, I think he's Welsh indoor champion in shot put at some point, throwing a 7.26 shot rather than a 6 kilos he would normally do. That's important for him. Dan Greaves also managed to gain a British junior international as a discus thrower when he was a Paralympic athlete in the early days. So, there is that opportunity, but of course, classifications sometimes doesn't make that possible. And I'm sure Peter has his thoughts on that as well.
Peter, thoughts on that?
No, not really. I mean, I agree that this is a good idea and we should work more on it. And the question is, how far does it go? I mean, for example, can Marcus jump at the World Championship, IWF World Championship or Olympic Games? I mean, Oscar was allowed to run the Olympic Games in the 4x4, I think, in the 400. But when an American athlete tried to get the same approval to be at the Olympics, he even went to court. He was denied that, right? So it's an open question. I don't have an answer for it. I would like to see it, but can we do it? And it says, like Sean said, depending on the classification, how does it fit in? Nobody saw that Danny Greaves was throwing a lighter discus at the Diamond League events, which is fine. I think it was good that he was part of that. So I'm full for it.
Okay, any more thoughts on classification before we move on? So there's a couple of good questions in the chat. So there's a good training question. Let's talk coaching for a few minutes here while we have another half hour left here. One of the questions was, are there any special considerations for training for a uni-blade sprinter, like special technique, exercises, strengthening of muscles, training that's different than, say, a regular able-bodied sprinter? Anybody want to take a stab at that answer? Who trains sprinters here? Maybe Suzanne, maybe?
Yes, I go in that one. So yeah, I was privileged to coach a unilateral blade runner, and I think the one aspect that you need to consider is the adaptation phase towards a blade. So whenever you change a blade, there's a motor learning component that goes with that, and that adaptation phase take place. I also found that the sound leg took a lot of hammering. So the training load, you need to consider what is going on the sound leg, and consider what is going, the exercises that you do. And we also needed to work a lot on the core stability and the strength in the lower back, because of the difference in the feedback from your sound leg with the blade. You need to be very stable in the core, otherwise lower back injuries is a challenge that you need to maintain from that. But yeah, the sound leg became for me a very, very good idea and a feedback tool. So if that leg gets tired, I needed to drop some of the training load in that because of the adaptations that takes place. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have an answer to that? Thoughts on training? Antonio, was your question answered? Oh, that's good. Okay, here's another interesting question on training. So it affected, I guess, me personally, because one of my good friends in Vancouver was Steve Walters, a very good, open sprinter. He was like at least 47-point runner. And back in Vancouver in Canada, we had a great visually impaired runner named Dustin Walsh, great 400-meter runner, sprinter. And the problem with him is that he was a really good sprinter. So you need to find a good able-bodied person to guide him. You can't have him or her at a lesser speed. So how do you find and pair somebody up with a world-class Paralympian? I mean, that must be quite a challenge. You know, if you're in a small city, how do you do it? Even big cities. Anybody have any thoughts on trying to find a guide? Anybody here? I mean, other than, you know, like Craigslist or, you know, Gumtree or something. I mean, you can't, it's hard. I mean, it's got to be hard to find someone who can be at your equal, right? Or better in this case, because that guide has to run the same rounds as you. They also get a medal as well, which is kind of nice. I like that. But no, there must be a way to find partners, because if we want more exposure to the Paralympics, we need to find, you know, opportunities, and we need to be able to find someone who's your speed. Peter?
We try to match it up with clubs and athletes in clubs or coaches in clubs. So we've always been fortunate to find it. It's not just the speed, it's also the stride length, right? That might have to match. So it's complex, but even in the US, they had a lot of good guide runners to run.
Yeah, I know there was, I forget the incident, but I think it was Rio, where the Brazilian lady, her guide pulled a hamstring on the last 100. So, you know, I mean, stuff happens in the Olympics, but yeah, you got to find, you know, two, you know, fit and, you know, mentally strong athletes. So now there's a lot of good questions and a lot of good controversies with Paralympics, and I like to just sort of go back more to the coaching side of things. So let's talk about funding. Okay, Sean mentioned funding. Anybody wants to open up that can of worms about funding? Anybody? Sean, since you asked it, what do you think about the funding situation?
I was going to make the point that finding a guide runner for a good visually impaired runner, it becomes a lot easier if that visually impaired runner is funded. So we had some pretty good guide runners running with some of our visually impaired athletes in the UK, some extremely talented people, but trying to find that matchup. But because of we are lucky, I guess, our Paralympic program is funded at the same level as our Olympic program. So a Paralympic medalist looking for a new guide runner, that guide runner would also be funded on a very high level. So it gave a little more choice to finding that athlete. But you know, I think when we go around the world, I think some of the other countries are not so lucky as we are in Great Britain. I think from 2012 or the lead up to 2012, there was parity in funding, and so you know, it makes it a lot easier for athletes to develop themselves and in the Paralympic sector. So I don't think it's so easy in some other countries for a Paralympic athlete to gain sponsorship, to gain funding. So if you're outside of the system or not at a high level, it's pretty tough to support yourself. You know, when you don't get very many opportunities to compete and show yourself on a big stage. As the Paralympics, there aren't many other opportunities that you're going to get press coverage even or television exposure. So it makes it tough.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on Sean there. And I suppose that really begins to be glaring when it comes to the purchase of equipment.
Yeah. Special equipment. Bring that point up, because like the able-bodied Olympics, those with the best shoes, you know, and the best access to best technology and the best coaches got good results. So, you know, this is a global sport, right? I mean, it's always the same, you know, 6 countries winning all the medals, right? GB and USA and South Africa. So what can we do to make it more parity to the, you know, lower economic countries, like say India or parts of Africa? Any thoughts on that? On maybe Trevor or Sean?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the other hats I wear is my family. We have a charity that supported young athletes, able-bodied and para athletes in the UK, which we've supported for over 30 years now. And we get a lot of requests and we help, and it's small amounts of money, but it is noticeable that we get requests from the Paralympic athletes because they're looking to buy a racing wheelchair that's going to cost £3,500, whereas we get a request from an able-bodied athlete athlete that's looking for a new pair of sweats or a new pair of spikes at 50 pounds. You know, we bought Mo Farah his first pair of spikes ever as a 15-year-old, but you know, the expense required for a road running frame or a racing wheelchair or a new frame. So there has to be this other element of looking for support, looking for charity outlets that can help these athletes get into the sport. Because if a seated thrower cannot find a frame that's suited for him and his particular needs, and doesn't have someone that can build something to his specification, there's not a lot out there. So that there also needs to be this development of some standardization in equipment that makes it much more accessible, and hopefully some manufacturing companies would come in and do that. I've been involved in a couple of projects trying to come up with some standardized throwing frames, adjustable throwing frames, but it's not easy. And the equipment, you know, the specialist, if you're talking about a specialist prosthesis for someone like long jumper or sprinter, it's thousands of pounds now. So unfortunately, where it's been, I think in the USA, there's been a lot of support coming from ex-military and government putting in for people that have come from military and sustained injuries over there, and the technology available to them is very high, and that's encouraged a lot of people to come into Paralympic sport through that area. But in other countries, I think they find it very difficult. It's tough.
Yeah, Frank, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, not on this particular one, but to come back to your question about coaching matters. Okay, there are three areas that we as coaches have to work on, I guess. Two of them we're very, very cognizant of. The other one we're probably a little bit slower at. The first is the physical development of people and the recovery. Okay, we're pretty cool at that. And that's the same for whoever you're coaching. Likewise, the mental aspect. But when it comes to the emotional aspect, we're less hot normally as coaches. For example, it's a mystery to a lot of coaches how on earth people can have problems now with mental health at the top end. We're hearing a lot about that. And we haven't really spent an awful lot of time in any kind of sport looking at things like stress signatures. You know, what actually tips an athlete over the edge and so on. Now, it's very tempting to think that Paralympians don't have that problem. Why? Well, after all, they've had to overcome all of these hardships in life. They must be really robust physically, mentally, and emotionally. But there's my question. How much work do we do on the emotional preparation in Paralympics for the athletes? How good are we at that in that area?
Yeah, but I think the answer here is, I think they're so driven, they get hurt. I mean, we have someone here on the call here who's a single blade sprinter from Malta, and he's so driven, yet he ruptures his good leg, like, you know, Achilles ruptures. So good luck getting, well, we wish him luck to get him back healthy, but I mean, he's so driven, he works hard, he trains hard, but the stresses, the torque, the pounding on that is just incredible. Tabo, you want to answer that first before Peter?
Yeah, it's an interesting, it's a great question, Frank. And again, when you sit down and you listen to the stories of athletes who have particularly acquired their impairment through trauma, it's, I mean, you know, I've talked about going out on a boat, the boat capsizing, and the next minute they've woken up in hospital with no limbs. You know, another athlete basically playing around with their relatives, all of a sudden drops down in the middle of a park. Next thing, that person is rushed into hospital. They've got a tumor in their spine. Wakes up, and the whole operating theater is in chaos because what was a routine surgery means now this person has lost, you know, movement below, you know, below the chest, whatever. I don't want to give too much information away. That's why I'm being a bit little cryptic as well here. And you listen to these stories and you think, you know, one athlete told me very clearly that sport is still part of the rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And I don't think as yet we understand the emotional journey yet. I think given the amount of focus that coaches need to place on performance, and we are an elite environment predominantly, so it's very much about, you know, performance, but at the same time, what we often fail to grasp is the emotional consequence, or the emotional labor of pushing the limits, but at the same time, you know, having to overcome this kind of traumatic incident. So I think it's something that we need to learn more about. It's a PhD area that I really want to investigate, because we don't as yet do that really well. And like I said, one of the athletes that I interviewed for, it was almost 3 hours, talked about, you know, getting their impairment on the battlefield, and then having to find in sport, but sport was for them being social, gaining confidence, gaining that kind of emotional awareness again. So it wasn't performance for them, it was a part of the rehabilitation. So I think the key thing in this is, as coaches, we need to understand our athletes a lot more.
Okay. Yeah, it's good. I understand. Thanks for that, Jim. If we can just follow on just a couple of seconds. One of the reasons I've asked the question is because I've asked this through the academy work that we're doing, through the guy who's heading our education group, because I'm just convinced that in the coaches education and development programs at the moment, there is actually very, very little attention paid to modules that look into this area: stress signatures, conflict resolution, performing under pressure, emotional recovery. I mean, you see, I'm pretty sure we know how to recover, how to help people recover fast from physical traumas and bits and pieces, and mental. A good night's sleep can usually help you out there. But to recover from the emotional investment is actually inordinately difficult. And I'll give you my background to that very quickly. I work with a guy called Eddie Jones, who's the head coach for England Rugby, and I'm called a strategic consultant. And one of the things that I got absolutely wrong was that in playing the All Blacks, for example, in the semi-final, I completely miscalculated the amount of emotional investment there was in that competition. And as a consequence, did not calculate how on earth to recover from that to play that sort of small team from what do you call this, the team from South Africa? Oh yes, the Springboks. They then destroyed us in the final, and the England team simply hadn't recovered. I'm not taking away from South Africa the quality of getting the World Cup, but all I'm saying is that when you do invest heavily emotionally in a competition, in semi-finals, in particular in our sport, how many people are properly equipped to recover fast enough for the final? Okay. And can we help them in that?
Okay, great. Peter had his hand up. Peter, you had...
Yes, so a couple of questions. We have to remember that the Paralympic movement started from the war. And I think that's where sport came in as a part of rehabilitation. I think that has a certain amount of time period. And we did a study in the 80s that said that it takes, most people get into Paralympic sport after a traumatic accident or whatever incident it is. It takes 6 years before they actually get into the elite side of things. When it comes to the mental health and all the good things that Frank is talking about, I come back to the same. We're working a lot on the Olympic side with mental health and sports psychology, whatever it might be. So that should be the same thing for the Paralympic athletes. So I think the traumatic side of their life is one thing. I think after the traumatic side is another thing. And it's like being an athlete, a former athlete, and then living normal life. There's also like two different lives, right? Not neglecting the traumatic side of their injury. Can I ask my one question that I've been waiting for to ask Steffi, just to make her even more uncomfortable here? So Steffi, when it comes to the running blade or the jumping blade, what type of research do you do to find out the right stiffness, the right length, the right angle for the takeoff and so on when it comes to the training or competition?
We work short together with a biomechanic boy, and Marcus is by Özor, and 1 or 2 times a year he go to Iceland, and they make a big analysis for this jumping. And what I want to say, he is orthopedic techniker, I don't know, orthopedic technique, that's a job from Marcus. And he built not the prothese, but he built this what is when, I don't know, this stuff before the prothese he built itself, and therefore he has a very, very good feeling inside from this. And he has a really good feeling what's happened. When he changed a little bit, then he feel 1 millimeter, and that's not possible for me to see this. I need the biomechanic, and I need the feedback from Marcus, what we can do and what we can change. And yeah, okay.
So
I don't know if I understand you right, but
no, you're understanding me fine. So if you have 3 different jumping legs, for example, do you test them, and how do you test them, and then how do you determine which one is the best one?
yeah, that's a little bit difficult, because Marcus is he want to have the 150% perfect stuff, and every train, okay, I must change this, okay, I must change this, oh no, I need a little bit harder, oh no, that's not a little bit higher, and no, that's too hard, and I say, oh, that's a little bit hard, because one time I say, okay, now you jump this with prosthetic, you want to jump by the Paralympics. We don't change nothing more. That's the same prosthetic, but it's under the prosthetic, it's a nails, and you can change it a little bit. Then you can change a little bit the angle, and that's hard for a coach, because you think, okay, that was a good jump. Okay, that is a good jump. You jump world record. Oh no, it was not perfect. Yeah, it's good that you have athletes that he has a good feeling, but it's hard for a coach to feel the same, and not to do, okay, now we had it and now we get it. No, sometimes I maybe a little bit change. Yeah, it's not so easy.
Okay.
But we are on a good way. No.
I got 1 or 2 last questions here. So, so the game starts tomorrow. Athletics starts a few days later. What do you think the new track surface, the Mondo track surface in the Tokyo Stadium will have? I see Suzanne laughing. What do you think that's going to happen to the athletes? Suzanne, you want to comment on that? On the stadium? You're there? No?
Yeah, we haven't been able to get to the track, so the track is only going to be, South Africa only have on the 26th we can get on the warm-up track. So that is, I've read or listened to what has been said through the Olympic Games, and that was one of my thoughts, specifically about the feedback, because the stiffness of the blade and the surface feedback does have an impact on it, and I was wondering how the athlete is going to feel with that. And I was actually even thinking, Peter, you coach a lot of wheelchair races, and how that might have actually, the tire selection and those sort of things, and for the wheelchair races, if that might have an influence. And even if you think back on the visually impaired,
Okay.
Yeah, the visually impaired athletes, they respond a lot from feedback. And the kinesthetic awareness is a lot of that. So it is, I was laughing because it's questions I have, but I don't have an idea how they're going to respond to that, because that is quite a quite a good question to ask and wonder about.
Well, my big question is like the marathon, the velocities that these wheelchairs are going through. How do you grab a drink at the aid station? Right. I mean, we saw that French runner who knocked all those bottles down on purpose. So yeah, Peter.
As a wheelchair racer in marathon, you don't take the bottles or anything. You have a bag under or behind your seat, and then you have a hose that goes up. So they cover it that way. I think that you're going to see that the track surface is extremely fast, so that will have a good impact on the wheelchair racers in particular. Probably increase the tire pressure a little bit more. Adam Bleakney, who's on here, is a US head coach for wheelchair racing. He can probably answer that better than I, since I'm not there. The other thing that worries me is to see the javelin run up and how it demolished the athletes and injured the athletes, and I don't know if it's been fixed whatsoever at all.
Frank, comments on that?
Just a piece of my own ignorance here. When in past times, it was always possible to at least practice on the surface because the warm-up track surface was the same. Was that possible this time round?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, Frank.
With the bubble restrictions, you were only allowed into the village 5 days before or 3 days before. And so only at that point could you access the facilities, different from previous games. So there was a limit. They tried to let you in only 3 days before, and you leave the village 2 days after your event. That's part of the Japanese COVID protocols. So a lot of people go in.
The reasons asking, Sean, is that if you're going to compete on something, you should be allowed to train on it on the surface. And I'm just, is that possible?
So those people that were competing in the first couple of days and were therefore in the village got access to the track.
1 hour.
Yeah, for 1 hour, but that was it. Those that arrived into the village late because they were competing at the back end of the champs, they never got a chance to practice because the games was already happening and they didn't have the contact point.
And in the throws, we don't get to see the circles. We're not allowed to, we don't get in to see the circles. So you're dependent upon the warm-up area, and the warm-up area you could get into 3 days before, for example, when we arrived. And so the track surface should be the same in the warm-up area. An interesting thing that we've just raised in terms of the World Championships next year in Eugene, there is no space for a warm-up track around the stadium in Eugene. So we don't know where the warm-up track will be. There's nothing within a mile of the stadium. There's a South Eugene High School. So there's an artificial field, and there is a square track of about 200 meters, but there isn't a 400-meter track as there is meant to be of the same surface as in the stadium. So it's interesting for the World Championships next year.
What have they got inside the stadium, Sean? Because as I understand
it's a polytan surface from Bainon.
So inside the stands, yeah.
Also inside the stands, they have like a 500-meter track around the top surface of the same material. Yeah.
Okay. Get it. Yeah.
But there is no warm-up track as it is at the moment. There is a warm-up area that's an artificial field, and there is a small track of 200 meters, which is literally square. So
yeah, Suzanne had her hand up trying to say a few words. Yeah, Suzanne,
for the Paralympics, each country gets an hour and a half on the warm-up track. So yeah, that's what you have, and it is the same surface currently that we can work on. So that's a number. Like for South Africa on 26, we can go from 7:30 at night until 9 o'clock. That's our time that we can go and try out the surface. And the athletes, specifically for us, the long jump, that's something, because I've picked up from the Olympics, I really struggle to hit the takeoff area. So that is a part that we will think of, but that's an allowance that we have at the Paralympics to get on the track.
Okay, Peter, you have your hand up?
Susan, no stadium access whatsoever. You can't put your foot into the main stadium.
There's one, it's the starter practice. That's when we can get into the main stadium. It's with the starter practice, which is an hour, I think on the 26th, that is an allowance. So yeah, that's what we have.
Okay. Since we got a few minutes left, so Suzanne, spotlight on you. You have 2 minutes. Can you talk about your athletes coming up in the next few days? Give us a highlight of your athletes and what they're going to do, and or you rather not?
Yeah, no, I can speak on them. I have an arm amputee athlete, a female arm amputee athlete that is going to do 400, 200, 100. Cerebral Palsy athlete, T37 class, that's also focusing on, main event is 400, also competing 100 and 200. And then another Cerebral Palsy athlete, T38, that's doing 400 long jump, and then also 100. And then a visually impaired female athlete that's doing 100 meters. So it's all in the sprints and the jumps. And I'm looking, yeah, they're in a great shape. They're enjoying it here where, like, you know, the sprinters enjoy some of the humidity in the warm weather. So they are feeling good. So we're looking forward for it to start. Okay,
last rapid fire questions for Steffi. Do you think to be a new world record with a new track?
I don't know.
20.
Nothing is impossible. I don't know. We will see.
Okay.
But I have only Marcus, and I arrived on Monday next week, Tokyo, and I go back Saturday. Therefore, I'm the short time there. But I hope Marcus, he is in a good performance, and I hope he will jump far, and we will see. But I don't know. And now everything can happen.
Well, we learned from the last Olympics that all the favorites didn't always win. So don't bet money on your favorites, because unless you have full control over your athletes, don't bet your money, save your money. Okay, you know, I can keep on talking for another hour or two, but I think we should wrap this up now. We did a good hour and a half. It's exciting, it's great. And I really want to thank everybody. But before we close up, I want to Frank give a few words to close, and then Tabo a few words as well. Frank?
Well, let Tabo go first on this one.
Tabo, a few final words.
Yeah, guys, listen, thank you so much to all the panelists for sharing some really incredible insights, and also to the questions that came in. For me, this was a great learning opportunity, but as Suzanne said, it was a great opportunity to connect as well. And in these times, connection is probably one of the most overlooked aspects of our humanity. So it's really great to see you all. Just a reminder that the second session will be on the 6th of September at the same time, the same link. We might have a few more panelists, but also we might have some great, even more excited coaches logging in as well and telling us about the performances as well. But best wishes, and we'll see you next time.
Great, thanks, Tabo. Frank?
Okay, yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much indeed, all panelists. Great job. This has been a fantastic discussion. You know, they say that the journey of learning in life is one where you never arrive. And that was seriously brought front and center tonight in this discussion. I don't know about you, but I've learned a huge amount from this discussion tonight, and it certainly will enrich my own feelings about coaching going forward. So thank you for that. Thanks everybody else who's joined in. And once again, superstar, Jimson, you've done a fantastic job, mate. You are so good at this. As I explained to previous audiences, the way I see this is that we bring together the diversity of coaching like an orchestra. All of you playing different instruments, having different roles in life. But in order for us to create harmony out of that, you need a brilliant conductor. And that's just how I see Jimson Lee. Thanks very much indeed, Jimson. Thanks, my colleagues. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and getting all the fantastic hot news by the time we get to the end of the competition. All the best, Steffi, with your athletes. All the best, Suzanne, with yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Frank, for those kind words. Once again, before we close up, I got to thank all the panelists, especially the ones who are in Tokyo. Suzanne Ferreira, Steffi Nerias, thank you. Your thoughts, your input is amazing. And then Peter Erickson, Tabo Huntley, Trevor Painter, Sean Pickering, thank you again for attending. And then Frank, thanks again for organizing this. I think, like I said, it was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Great thoughts. I look forward in 2 weeks' time. It's a long ways, but a chance to watch the games, sit back, analyze, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks. So share the link to your friends. Let's get more people, more coaches, and get more conversations going. Thank you all.